Doctors say these 5 fruits can boost longevity and keep seniors out of the hospital. Before we begin, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being here, for taking time not just to watch, but to take care of the body that's carried you this far. George Thompson hadn't felt quite like himself for months, but it wasn't anything dramatic at first. It was small things like pausing at the top of the stairs a little longer or reaching for the handrail when getting out of bed. At 72, he chalked it up to just aging, the kind of phrase people toss around to explain away the slow erosion of strength and memory. But one cold January morning, as he stood in the bathroom, staring at his reflection, eyes a little more tired, hands a little more unsteady, he felt it. Something was changing. And this time, he wasn't sure it was something he could ignore. George lived in a modest 2-story home in Eugene, Oregon, with his wife Helen. They'd been married 48 years. He was a retired high school PE teacher, the kind who never stopped moving even in retirement. He kept up with yard work, ran the community walking group every Thursday, and made sure to never miss a morning stretch routine. Helen, with her calming energy and green thumb, spent her mornings in the garden and her afternoons volunteering at the library. Their life was peaceful, familiar, and built on a rhythm they both quietly cherished. But over the past year, that rhythm had started to skip beats. George began forgetting minor appointments. His energy waned faster than he liked to admit. His walking pace slowed, and one day last fall, he missed the Thursday group for the first time in 5 years, not because he forgot, but because he simply didn't feel up for it. Helen noticed, of course, but George brushed it off, joking that his battery needed recharging. Then came the night everything changed. It was just a cough at first, maybe a slight chill. But by midnight, George was wheezing, his chest tight and his breathing shallow. Helen rushed him to urgent care, where they diagnosed him with a mild case of pneumonia. He didn't need to be hospitalized, but the doctor's words stuck with him. "George, your immune system isn't bouncing back like it used to. We need to talk about prevention, not just treatment." That night, George lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. He hated hospitals, hated being vulnerable. The idea that something as simple as a cold could spiral into a medical emergency didn't sit well with the man who once ran laps with teenagers for a living. Helen sat beside him, holding his hand. "What did the doctor mean by prevention?" she asked gently. George shrugged. "He said something about diet, that some fruits have compounds that help your body fight off the aging process." "I don't know. Seemed a bit out there to me." Helen didn't think it sounded out there at all. In fact, she spent the next few days reading every article she could find on the subject. Blueberries for memory, avocados for the heart, pomegranates for circulation, papayas for digestion, apples for inflammation. "These aren't miracle cures," she told George one morning, sliding a bowl of yogurt and berries in front of him. "But they quietly help, and you won't notice the difference in a week. But maybe you will in a year." George didn't argue. He was skeptical, sure, but Helen's quiet conviction carried weight. So he ate the blueberries. He tried the avocado toast. He even drank the pomegranate juice, though he grimaced with every sip. In return, Helen promised not to say, "I told you so." If he felt better, it became a quiet pact between them. And yet something about the change unsettled him. For so long, George had been the strong one, the capable one. Now, he was being reminded gently, lovingly, that strength might look different these days, that it might mean asking for help or changing routines. That was a tough pill to swallow for someone who once lifted weights and led gym classes with ease. One evening, George sat alone in the living room while Helen prepared tea. He looked around at the home they had built, the photographs of grandkids, the trophies he'd kept from track meets long ago. He wasn't afraid of getting older, but he was afraid of becoming irrelevant, of losing himself. That night, he asked Helen a question he hadn't dared speak aloud before. "Do you think it's too late to make a real difference? I mean, for my health." She paused, sat beside him, and replied simply, "It's never too late, but you have to start now." Something shifted in George that night, not all at once, but like the slow turning of a tide. He didn't want to just live longer. He wanted to live better, with clarity, with energy, with independence. And if that started with fruit, then so be it. So they made a plan. A fruit chart on the fridge, new grocery routines, small but deliberate changes. George didn't feel better overnight, but the simple act of trying, of choosing health one bite at a time, made him feel like he was back in control. And that was more than he expected. If you've ever felt like aging was something happening to you rather than something you could influence, stay with us, because George's story is just beginning. And the fruit bowl on your counter might be doing more for your future than you think. The first time George forgot Lily's birthday, he chalked it up to the new medication. It was just one day off. The card sat on the kitchen table, the envelope even sealed. But Helen's silence that morning said everything. "She's only 6, once." Helen said softly as she poured his coffee. George didn't respond. He couldn't. The shame sat too heavy in his chest. That same week, he forgot his Wednesday walking group again. Not because he didn't feel up for it, but because he simply forgot what day it was. These weren't the kinds of mistakes George Thompson made, not the man who had managed locker rooms full of rowdy teenagers for decades, not the man who once remembered every phone number, every birthday, every appointment, without even writing them down. And now, he had started leaving sticky notes around the house, like breadcrumbs through a foggy maze. Fridge. Fans. Trash day. On the bathroom mirror, Lily, March 5th. On the front door, wallet, phone keys. It was more than forgetfulness. It was fear. A quiet fear that crept in at night, wrapped itself around his thoughts, and whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something worse. Helen noticed. Of course she did, but she didn't push. Instead, she added more fruit to his plate in the mornings. She replaced his afternoon cookies with sliced apples and peanut butter, swapped out white bread for whole grain with smashed avocado. She made smoothies with pomegranate juice and Greek yogurt, and slipped papaya cubes in beside his lunch. George didn't complain. He knew what she was doing. He even appreciated it, but something about it made him feel smaller, like he was slowly becoming a patient rather than a partner. Then came the follow-up appointment. Dr. Alvarez, the kind but blunt internist who had treated George during his pneumonia scare, sat across from him with a clipboard and calm eyes. "George," she said gently, "your body's talking to you. It's not shouting yet, but it's whispering. Your blood pressure's improved. That's good, but the memory slips the low energy. That's not just age. It's your body asking for help. George tensed. So, what more pills? Dr. Alvarez smiled. Actually, less. We're not adding anything right now. But I want you to keep doing what you're doing. Especially the diet changes. She leaned in, tapping the chart. There's more science than ever backing this up. Blueberries, pomegranates, avocados. They aren't just good choices. They contain real compounds that reduce inflammation, protect the brain, improve circulation. You might not notice it day to day, but long term, these foods change the game. George nodded slowly. It's hard to tell if it's working. Dr. Alvarez gave a sympathetic smile. That's the thing about prevention. When it works, nothing happens, and that's the point. As George and Helen walked out of the clinic, the wind whipped across the parking lot. He pulled his coat tighter and looked at her. I want to give this a real shot, he said. Not just to avoid getting worse, but to feel like myself again. Helen squeezed his hand. We'll do it together. But despite his resolve, doubt still lingered. Some days, he felt no different. He still misplaced his wallet. Still took longer to process conversations. Still had to pause mid-sentence when a word wouldn't come. The worst part wasn't what was happening. It was not knowing whether it would ever stop. One Sunday afternoon, George sat alone in the den, flipping through old photo albums. Pictures of him in his coaching days. Beach trips with the grandkids. Helen in her garden. Lily in a tutu. They were markers of a life fully lived, and a reminder of everything he stood to lose. He closed the album and stared at the wall, eyes stinging. I'm trying, he whispered to no one. But what if it's not enough? That evening, Helen came in carrying a small bag from the co-op. Look what they had today, she said, pulling out a ripe papaya, fresh organic. And guess what? It's packed with an enzyme that helps with digestion and energy. George chuckled. You're turning into a walking health commercial. She grinned. You're worth the investment. Something about that moment stuck with him. Not the fruit, not the science, but the quiet way Helen kept showing up. No lectures, no pressure, just persistence. A gentle, loving resistance against decline. That night, George wrote a note to himself on a fresh sticky. It read, keep going. Not for what you've lost, for what's still yours. He put it on the mirror, right next to Lily's birthday. If you've ever doubted that small changes can have real power, stay with us. Because in the next chapter, George faces a moment of crisis and learns that the road to strength isn't always visible until you look back. It happened on a Wednesday. One of those cold, overcast mornings where even the coffee seemed to taste duller. George had just returned from his usual walk with Helen, just a few laps around the block. Slow, but steady. He'd started getting into a rhythm again, less brain fog. Fewer pauses. Maybe the papayas, avocados, and pomegranate juice really were making a difference. Maybe he was getting stronger. Until everything unraveled. Helen was in the kitchen when she heard the thud. Not a crash, not a shout. Just a heavy, sudden thud, the kind that chills your blood before you even move. She rushed into the hallway. George was on the floor halfway between the bathroom and the den, one hand gripping the doorframe. the other trembling, trying to push himself up. "George," she cried, dropping to her knees. He was pale, drenched in sweat, and confused. I don't know what happened," he murmured, blinking as if trying to wake up from a dream. "I just got dizzy. Couldn't catch myself." She called the ambulance before he could protest. At the hospital, time moved both too fast and too slow. Nurses came and went. Machines beeped rhythmically. George lay on the bed, IV in his arm, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. When the doctor came in with the results, George braced himself. But the words still hit like a truck. "Mr. Thompson," she said gently, "you had a drop in blood pressure, likely caused by dehydration and low blood sugar. We ran additional tests, and there are some early signs of mild cognitive impairment. Nothing severe yet, but something we want to monitor closely." George looked away, jaw tight. "So, this is it then? The beginning of the end?" Helen squeezed his hand. "George?" "No," he said, not to her, but to the ceiling. "I've done everything right. I've eaten the damn fruit. I've walked every morning. I've given up my sweets, my bourbon. For what? To end up on the floor like a helpless fool." The doctor waited patiently. Sometimes, even when we do everything right, the body still reminds us it's aging. But doing nothing, that would have made it worse. What you're doing has slowed things down. It's why this wasn't something worse, like a stroke or a fall, that broke your hip. But George wasn't listening anymore. In his mind, he was already back on that hallway floor. Vulnerable, useless at home. The next day, the silence was heavier than usual. Helen made tea. George sat by the window, his gaze distant. That morning, he'd tried to button his shirt and fumbled twice. His fingers felt clumsy, like they no longer fully belonged to him. It wasn't just about memory anymore. It was about dignity. "You're angry," Helen said quietly. Not as a question, but as truth. He nodded. "I feel like I'm disappearing in pieces. Every day. Another part of me slips away. But not all of you," she replied, placing a bowl of blueberries and apple slices on the table. "The part that showed up at Lily's recital. The part that held my hand through cancer. The part that reads the paper out loud just to make me laugh. He's still here." George stared at the fruit. "It just feels like I'm doing all this, and it's still not enough." Helen sat beside him. "Maybe it's not about fixing everything. Maybe it's about doing the little things so you can hold on to something longer. So we get one more morning like this, one more walk, one more story at bedtime." George didn't answer. That night, as he stood brushing his teeth, he saw the note on the mirror. "Keep going. Not for what you've lost, for what's still yours." His hands were still shaking, but his heart oddly was steady. In the coming weeks, the fear didn't disappear. But something changed. George started writing down his thoughts each morning. Just a few lines. Sometimes about his dreams, sometimes about what he remembered from the day before. He called it his staying journal. Helen added new fruits to his routine: kiwis, blackberries, even dragon fruit once, which George hated. But he laughed about it. The man who'd fallen in the hallway wasn't gone. He was still recovering, still afraid. But now he had a reason to keep climbing. Because this wasn't just about preventing disease. It was about preserving the moments that mattered most. One piece of fruit, one breath, one quiet victory at a time. If you've ever felt like doing the right things wasn't making a difference, keep watching, because in the next chapter, George discovers something unexpected, a moment that changes not his body, but his belief in what's possible. It was a Thursday morning when George received a letter in the mail. Not a bill, not a flyer, but a real handwritten letter. The kind no one sent anymore. The return address read Lily Thompson, Missoula, Montana. He smiled. His granddaughter had been away at college for nearly a year now, studying environmental science and photography, just like her old grandpa once loved. They still talked occasionally, mostly texts or calls, but this was different. He sat down with his coffee, tore the envelope gently, and began to read. Dear Grandpa, it began in neat, slanted handwriting. I know you've been having a rough time lately. Mom says you've been eating a lot of fruit and going on walks and trying really hard to stay strong. I just wanted to say, I see you, I love you, and I remember everything. George's breath caught. He kept reading. I remember when you taught me how to hold a camera, how to wait for the right light. I remember the way you made blueberry pancakes when I stayed over, and how you once told me that getting older didn't mean getting smaller. It meant becoming more you. I never told you, but that's why I chose this major, because you helped me see the world in layers. I hope you keep fighting. I hope you keep eating the weird papaya stuff Grandma makes, and I hope you know you've already done enough. Just being you is enough. Love, Lily. George folded the letter, slowly, carefully, like it was made of glass. He placed it in the center of the table and just stared. Something inside him shifted. Not a thunderclap, not a dramatic epiphany, just a quiet softening, a deep exhale. Later that day, he told Helen, "Let's go somewhere." "Somewhere?" she asked, tilting her head. "Somewhere green," he said. "Somewhere. I can take a picture." So they drove just 20 minutes out to the Pine Hollow Preserve, the place he used to visit with Lily on weekend hikes. The air was crisp, the trails muddy. The clouds were low and heavy, but the trees stood tall, bright with early spring. George lifted his old Nikon dusty but still reliable and framed the branches against the sky. His hands trembled slightly, but he found the button, adjusted the lens, and snapped the shutter. Click. The sound was like a heartbeat. Click. A pulse of memory. For the first time in months, George felt grounded, present like himself. They sat on a bench beneath a towering birch, sharing an orange and a handful of mixed berries Helen had packed. I forgot how much I missed this," George said quietly. Helen smiled. "You didn't forget. You just paused." That evening back at home, George printed out the photo. He'd taken a silhouette of tree limbs stretching into the fog. He pinned it beside Lily's letter on the fridge. 2 anchors, one from the past, one for the future. Over the next few days, something shifted. Not in George's memory, or his coordination, or even his stamina, but in his attitude. He wasn't trying to outpace aging anymore. He was choosing to walk beside it. He began to appreciate these slow mornings again, the feel of an avocado sliced just right, the way blueberries burst between his teeth, the strange joy of learning that pomegranate stained everything, but still tasted like determination. One morning, Helen caught him humming while chopping fruit. "Well," she said, with a raised brow, "look, who's starting to enjoy himself?" "I still don't like papaya," he grumbled. "But you're still eating it," he shrugged. "It's for Lily." But they both knew it was more than that. It was for the man he used to be and the man he was becoming. That Sunday, George surprised Helen with a new ritual: fruit and photos. After breakfast, they'd try a new fruit together, then go for a short drive to take one good picture. Nothing fancy, just one that made them pause. A handful of raspberries and a roadside barn, a slice of mango and a rusted mailbox. Each moment documented, each taste remembered. They called it their longevity journal. And in those quiet hours among fruit slices, shutter clicks, and laughter, George rediscovered the truth he'd nearly forgotten: that the goal wasn't to live forever, it was to live fully, mind, body, and soul, one sweet, sticky bite at a time. If you've ever wondered whether it's too late to start again, to reclaim something small and sacred, don't miss Chapter 5. Because in our final chapter, George makes one final promise to himself and to the life still waiting for him. The cherry blossoms came late that year, delicate pink clouds lining the streets, softening the edges of everything. And for George, they felt like a personal invitation from life itself, quiet, beautiful, unexpected. He stood at the front steps with Helen, a basket in hand. Inside, blueberries, avocado toast, 2 apples, and a small bottle of fresh squeezed pomegranate juice. "Picnic in the park?" he asked, holding out his hand like they were 20 again. She raised an eyebrow. "You planning to carry me there too? Only if you promised to pretend I still could." So they walked slow, steady, hand in hand. Their park wasn't much, just a patch of green behind the community library. But that day, it felt like a cathedral, the kind of place where time paused just long enough for two people to breathe in the present. They laid out the blanket, unpacked their snacks, and sat in silence for a while, watching kids chase frisbees, listening to birds, letting the sun warm their shoulders. Then Helen said, "You know you've changed?" George blinked. "More wrinkles?" "No," she smiled. "Less fear." He thought about that, about the fall, the hospital, the fruit bowls, and the stubborn mornings, about the letter from Lily, about the old camera now slung around his neck like it had never left. "I think I've finally realized something," he said. "What's that?" "That this body of mine, it's not broken. It's not even failing. It's just trying. And I need to stop treating every ache like a betrayal and start treating it like a message. A reminder to live a little slower, but not smaller." Helen nodded. "And what do you want to do with this new wisdom of yours?" He smiled softly. "I want to promise myself one more season. One more. One more where I show up fully. For myself. For you. For Lily. For every person. I still have something left to give to. I don't care if I can't remember every name, or if I walk with a limp, or if I need a nap after lunch." He picked up a slice of papaya, held it up like a toast, to showing up anyway. She raised her water bottle to one more season. That night, George did something bold. He signed up for a photography workshop at the local rec center, not to teach, but to learn. Beginner, digital photography, the flyer said. Most of the class would be teenagers, but George didn't care. He wanted to see through new eyes again. He also called Lily. Not a text, not a voicemail. A real call. "Grandpa," she shouted into the phone. "Wait, is this a pocket dial?" "Nope," he chuckled. "Just an old man figuring things out." They talked for 40 minutes about light and shadows, about memory, and forgetting about how growing older didn't mean disappearing. It meant becoming. She cried a little, he did too. But when they hung up, he felt lighter than he had in months. The next day, he bought a fresh notebook. On the first page, he wrote, "My longevity plan: walk when I can, laugh when I can't, eat fruit I don't like for reasons I do like, take more pictures than excuses, tell people I love them while I still can." Over the following weeks, George followed that plan with quiet devotion. Each fruit became a small ritual of love. The blueberries reminded him of Lily. The avocados made Helen smile. The apples helped him feel strong, steady. The pomegranate juice became his liquid courage, and the papaya. He still didn't like it, but he never skipped it. He started remembering people's names again. Not always perfectly, but more than before. His balance improved. His energy came in longer waves, but more importantly, he was showing up. To life, to others, to himself. One Saturday morning, after finishing his fruit and photos ritual with Helen, he stood at the kitchen sink and whispered something under his breath. Thank you, not to a person, just out into the world. For second chances, for tiny victories, for one more season. At the next family gathering, George brought a framed photo for Lily. It showed a single cherry blossom branch, stretching into the light petals, gently falling. On the back, he'd written, "You reminded me to keep blooming." So I did. Love, Grandpa. She cried when she read it, then hugged him like she was trying to hold on to spring itself. George knew he wouldn't live forever, but that had stopped being the goal. He just wanted to live fully today, and maybe tomorrow, and maybe a few seasons more. However long the fruit bowls stayed full, and the light stayed good, and so can you. If you're over 60 and wondering if it's too late to change your story, it's not. Start with breakfast. Start with blueberries. Start by promising yourself one more season. Because the secret isn't in trying to live forever. It's in living well, starting now. Thanks for being here. If this story moved you, please share it with someone you care about. Let's all show up. One season, one fruit, one breath at a time.